My name is Peter Weber. I'm the technical director at the St. Croix Festival Theatre, and I'd like to give a quick shout out to our season sponsors and a thank you for continuing to be a sponsor, even though we've not been able to put on any live theater for you. And this is
Emma Kravig, costume designer, with my first professional credit being with Festival Theater in 2015.
Yeah, and so I guess let's just jump right into it with a question. Why Festival Theater? What got you started there?
Well, I grew up in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, and one of my favorite things growing up at the St. Croix school system was our field trips to Festival Theater to go see productions. I remember seeing your 2009 production, I think, of what was it? Little Shop of Horrors, which
Yep.
was so fun. And I remember in that moment, I had never seen anything more magical in my life.
Hmm.
So that is kind of why when I was pursuing theater in college, I applied for your apprenticeship program for the summer of 2015. And it just so happened that the show I designed was your 2015 Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah, and if I remember correct, there was a little difference in our design for that show than the first one, in that our plants were not puppets. You want to
Yes.
talk about that? Because that was
Yes.
a pretty big change.
It was played by Rachel, who previous member of staff. She played the plant, Audrey 2, in our 2015 production, which I thought was a really cool way and unique way of doing it. So she really got to interact with Seymour, who was played by Seth, who was, I think, in a previous video here.
Yes,
And he and those two just really played off of each other in such a cool way. And as Audrey 2 started eating people, those people who were eaten started getting added to the plant. So by the end of the production, everybody had a plant costume where they were entirely in green, and they kind of worked with Rachel or Audrey 2 to be kind of this giant human plant.
Mm-hmm. Which is very different than, I just got some feedback, which is very different than normal technical productions of it, where they have a giant plant puppet. So that, yeah, I thought that was a very interesting take as well when we did that. I'm glad you were working on it.
Yeah.
So let's see. What other shows have you done with Festival so far? Because you started in 2015, but you worked on other shows with us.
Yes. In 2015, I assisted on A Streetcar Named Desire, directed by Mark Baer. And then I also did Shakespeare Revised Abridged, also in 2015. In 2016 or 17, I did Private Lives. And then I've done last year Fools. I did, I should have had a list. Fools, The Marvelous Wonderettes. And then I've done, oh man, I'm blanking on the rest. I've done a lot over the years.
I know that similar thing when people ask me my shows that I've done. Do you have a favorite of those shows that stands out?
Oh man, I definitely think A Streetcar Named Desire in 2015 was really, I think, was such an amazing cast. And it really, every night in tech, it was like watching that show for the first time ever. Everybody was so amazing. Kim Murphy who's the head designer, found so many amazing vintage costumes that just made the play really set in the era. And it just felt so real and alive. So that is definitely my favorite.
So in the world, because some of our viewers might not know, what does a costume designer do? And then what would a costume designer's assistant do in that kind of situation?
Yeah, so a costume designer makes sure that once the show is opened, everybody has a costume. And they're also making sure that every actor knows what costume they should be wearing when. Starting off, your first conversation would probably be with either the artistic director to sign on to the production. And then your second conversation would be with the director to start talking about what the director envisions and thinks the show will be about and how they are imagining it in your mind. And how I view my job as a costume designer is really trying to make the director's vision or dream come to fruition. So that's kind of the starting point. And then as a designer is making sure the director's vision happens and how whatever needs to take place for that to happen. So either it's building costumes or it's pulling or sourcing costumes. So Festival Theater has a pretty large selection of costumes in stock, a lot of vintage costumes that a lot of amazing people are willing to donate for us to use. Renting, a lot of companies will rent out costumes, or other theaters will trade costumes and exchange costumes. And then there's building costumes. So actually starting from a pattern or making your own pattern and creating something. And for example, in A Streetcar Named Desire, we built Stanley's silk pajama set for that show that he wears in one of the last scenes of the production.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So yes, let's see. Aside from being a costume designer, I want to not forget that you are also a Festival Theater board member. And
Yes.
how did that come about, and what's it like being a board member for Festival?
I became a board member, I believe, in 2018. I was my first year on the board. Ooh. And it became
just gets
Jason.
It just gets worse as years go by.
Right. But I believe it's 2018 was my first year. And Jason, artistic director Jason, asked if I'd like to sit on a board meeting and asked if I had any interest. And I definitely did. I wanted to be able to be as involved in Festival Theater as I could. Being on the board was a really eye-opening experience. I had a vague idea what boards did for a company, but I didn't really know how much went into it and how involved the board was for this theater. And so it was really interesting going into that side of the theater, which I had really no training on in college. So it's a lot of community outreach, trying to get people to donate, to be involved, being the liaison and having, being able to really, trying to find the right word, being able to try to help the theater and make the theater grow and try to reach our mission statement as much as possible, which is to bring art to the St. Croix Valley.
Great. And shameless plug, if there's anyone watching this video and they'd like to become a festival board member, they can contact either Isaac through marketing or the box office, and we'll get you to the right place.
There's a lot to do, and it is such a rewarding experience. I highly recommend it.
I would consider it, but I'm an employee, so it makes me unable to. Conflict of interest and all. Let's see. Talked about that. I guess, what other things do you just enjoy about costume design? I
love the history. I've always been fascinated with history, but not at all with like wars. So history in school, like traditional, like K through 12, never interested me because that was the focus. But as soon as you started talking about what people wore, that really, I feel, comes alive, and I get to feel like I know what people were living like and how they lived in that time. And so that really has always kind of been a passion of mine, to learn as much about costuming and history of what people wore, all the way back to biblical or like ancient Romans, ancient Egyptians times.
Yeah, I like doing dramaturgical work as well, and I always was impressed whenever a costume designer comes in. Like when Kim would come in, she'd have, some images, or you'd come in and you'd have a Pinterest board with a bunch of just costume images, and it's just like, it takes a lot of time to find that specific material, because it's fashion changes so quickly, correct?
Yes, and also being so making a vintage style work in a theater setting is also part of costuming. So a lot of clothing, vintage clothing, is very restrictive. And so kind of tricking the silhouette and tricking construction of the garment so it still looks vintage, but allows actors to have a full range of motion is another kind of thing that a costumer will do to make it still look like you're in the world, but allow the actor to be able to move freely and not be hampered by their clothing.
So as a designer, do you ever run into problems with like I know Victorian era loved lining stuff with silk and that material. Does that ever cause any issues then in that idea of making it look like it is a silk lined coat, but is not?
Yep. Well, so my first question as a costumer would be, do they have to take the coat off?
Mm.
And if they do
You
have to
don't.
take the coat off, do they have to show the inside of the garment? So theater costumes are different than, say, fashion clothing or any kind of real, like what people would have worn, because the inside of theater costumes are very rarely finished fully. They'll still have exposed seams, and that allows the costumer, if they need to change the costume later, it makes it easier for them to get into the structure of the garment and change it for different actors or just to repair the costume. So a silk line jacket would be cost I would be concerned about. Can we do a replacement, something that a modern fiber that looks silky? And then two, if we don't actually need to line the garment because it's never actually taken off on stage, do we actually need to have it be lined? Would be my question.
Those make a lot of sense. Yeah, right. You don't want to spend a bunch of money buying silk for something that's never really used.
Yep.
What did I think of in there? I thought of another question and now it's escaping me. It made me think of if a costume piece is on stage and someone say there's a scene where they're drinking coffee and then there's a risk of it being stained. Do you do anything about that? Or like the upkeep of costumes? And, I was thinking about adjusting seams or, who washes them between shows kind of questions.
Yep. So like with your example of the spilling of the coffee, my first question would be, is this a piece of clothing that the actor needs to continue to wear? Can it be just a prop piece of clothing? So that makes it not a costume anymore. It's just a prop that can get spilled on as many times as we want. Is it a costume that the character needs to wear for the rest of the show and have a big coffee stain on it? Because then my suggestion as a costumer would be, let's have a prop costume and then a real costume that just has a fake coffee stain, so it can be consistent from night to night and the actor doesn't have to wear something wet. So having multiples of a costume can really be helpful for scenes like that. And then, of course, if it has to be a costume that gets something like water or a stain put on, there are things that can block water from actually penetrating the fibers. And so then we could talk about treating the costume with something so that the costume actually wouldn't become stained during the run of the show. Laundry for the show is a big part of what costumers do. And it depends going between different theaters. So festival theater, for example, doesn't have an in-house laundry. So the costumer usually will take them to the local laundromat or will do laundry at home. Having a laundry schedule is really important. And I'm a big advocator as a costumer of after every show, because you can't always do laundry for some of these big costumes between every show. Vodka spray, so 50% water, 50% of the cheapest vodka you can get, and you spray it on the inside of the costume, and it is a very good odor neutralizer, and it doesn't have any adverse effects on people's skin. So it's really nice for the actors to not have, one, smelly clothes, and two, have an allergic reaction to a very chemical-laden product.
And I'll take a moment here to throw a little plug out to Bridget at the laundromat in St. Croix here, who, it's great that we have a business right down the street that we can go and utilize for, making sure that our costumes are not dirty.
Yeah, it is excellent.
Let's see, what was my next question? Oh, I was also wondering then about costume repairs. Like, what is the, stuff breaks and rips. Actors are notoriously hard on things, I always say, because, right, they're just throwing it on quick for a scene, so they don't maybe think about how much time it took to sew it, and, they might not know. So, like, what's your worst repair you've had to do?
Oh, worst repair. I don't think of things in terms of worst or best.
Mhm.
And I also don't ever want an actor to be so stressed out about hurting their garment that it
Mhm.
keeps them from acting at their full potential. Um, I would always rather the actor be comfortable and rip something than be uncomfortable and not put their all into their own job as an actor. Um, that being said, some of the for me, some of the hardest repairs are a tear in like a non-seamed area. So like
Mhm.
a large panel that just has like a huge rip can be pretty hard to cover, or like if somebody put like a golf ball sized hole in like the center of a shirt, to patch something in the center and have it look unpatched can be kind of tricky, especially because we in theater don't really have the time to send it in to be reweaved. So like the
Mhm.
actual process of putting in a patch that is actually rewoven into the garment, because that can take months to have it done, and theater does not work on that timeline. Things
Mhm.
have to be done and repaired quickly, sometimes even in a matter of minutes.
Mhm. Have you? I'm trying to think. Thinking back to shows. I don't remember. Have you ever worked on a kids show with us?
I have not worked with you guys on a kid show, but I have donated objects to your kids show. Like my dress form was in
Oh yes.
Robin Hood
Mhm.
last year.
Mhm.
Um, yes, I
Okay.
have worked on kids shows before for different companies. Can I give a shout out?
Yeah. Please.
To Soar Academy. They do a lot of great work with middle schoolers and high schoolers in the Twin Cities area, and they're a lot of fun to work with. I love working with child actors. I think they can have this, like kids can have the smallest role, but they give 150% every time, and they can
Mhm.
have the most amazing backstories for their own character, and I really love working with that energy that children give.
Mhm. Awesome. I couldn't remember if you had, so I was going to ask about the difference between an adult show and costuming and a youth show and costuming.
um Budgeting fabric. Youth shows, you people are smaller, so building costumes is a lot faster and
Mm.
costs a lot less, just because you can be buying like half the amount of material for a child actor that you would need for the same type of costume for an adult.
Mhm.
um, then also types of closures for kids versus adults. So like a lace up something can be really hard for a 10-year-old to put on and off and handle on their own. Where an
Mhm.
adult, it can still be something tricky, but you can trust them to learn and be able to compensate for their lack of knowledge by the time the show opens.
Mhm.
So finding costumes that can be kid friendly can be a little bit different than finding an adult a costume that can be adult actor friendly. Yeah.
Awesome. Um, the An aspect of costume design that, again, if you're in the theater world, you've probably been through one. The costume parade. Some people dread it, some people love it, but it's definitely the time of a show where, right, everything's turned over to the director and costume designer to look at actors and stuff.
Mhm.
Would you like to? You have any thoughts on it? I mean, do you really like it? Do you hate it?
Um, I always find the parade. Not every theater does a costume parade. It kind of depends for
Mhm.
theater to theater. I personally, by the time we reach the costume parade, it's usually maybe like less than a week before tech.
Mhm.
So my dream for a costume parade is that there is no comments, because there's very little time to like completely rework a costume. And at that point in the production, I really hope the director and I have had enough conversations and understanding, and showing them photos of every fitting that I've sent a costume
Mhm.
through. So we've already been having almost constant communication about the costumes at this point. So my greatest nightmare is to get to a dress parade, have a costume you've put close to 80 hours into, and then have the director just not like it. And
Mm.
then trying to figure out how can I change it and how can we get the production that the director and we all want to have happen. Um, but then the other great thing about Costume Parade is the chance to see costumes under theater light. So the lights in theater are very different than any light that's in your home, probably. Red lights or blue lights, and that can completely change the color of the costume. And so you want your design to look like your design under theater lights. So that I think is the greatest strength for a costumed parade, is to see the costumes in the theater lights and have more time to troubleshoot color,
Hmm.
versus really any major style change.
Yeah. And I agree with that, because as a lighting designer, I love when I get to see some costumes under light, because then I can go, oh no, I made a huge mistake. I
Yep.
put this, blue on there that's reflecting off of something on someone's costume and just making it look washed out.
Oh, exactly. Or I think, man, I'm talking about Streetcar Named Desire a lot, but I think Streetcar Named Desire had this amazing dress we had Jackie in when she played
Mhm.
Blanche. And I remember Kim and I were just so excited. It was like this perfect vintage. It fit her perfectly. And it was the same color as the wall the set was painted as.
Oh
And
yeah.
so she got on stage and she just perfectly blended into the background.
Oh
And so we
man.
couldn't use that dress anymore, because what are you going to change? Can we change the dress or change the color of this wall?
Yeah.
And it's easier for us to change a dress at that point than change the wall color.
Yeah. Oh, oh, I remember that one too. It was a really good dress.
Yep.
Didn't you guys add it into one of the ones that Stella was carrying in one
Yes.
of the scenes as like she was, yeah, she had it then
It
still.
was so good. We had to have it in the show somehow.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that jumps back to and thinking of a question about costumes as props, because I'm a prop designer, so a lot of times I'm designing different pieces, and there's always a time where I come across a thing that's like, oh, I don't know how to do this. Maybe my costume designer can help. So maybe, do you have any thoughts on the crossover between costumes and props?
Yep. So I think that is like the first production meeting you have between every designer, I think,
Hmm.
is the most important production meeting you can have. At that point, you should have read through the script and made a note of wherever a prop could be or a costume could be. And that would be like the perfect time for props designers and costume designers to kind of make a checklist and say, I feel like this could be one or the other. What do you feel
Hmm.
comfortable with and what don't you feel comfortable with?
Yeah.
Um, so that I think is the first thing. And then just making sure you have clear communication between the designers on who is covering what,
Hmm.
I think. So I think one show I had, we needed a World War II like helmet. And that was easy for the costumer to find, because even though it was used as a prop, I had a source where I could get one of those very easily. So that
Hmm.
was a good intersection between costume and props.
Yeah, you had one of these sources, right, where you just go like this.
Yep, and it's right there.
Yeah, I
Oh,
love when I have those kind of sources.
yep.
um, yeah, cool. I'm looking in and I'm not seeing. I'd written down, some questions, and I'm not seeing any others. What other thoughts do you have?
Um, that it's a really rewarding job. It's a
Mm,
lot of fun to watch something go from just bare bones and to watch everything come together. Um, it's an amazing job for collaboration, working together with people. And I have never done a show where not everybody puts in their all to try to get something to be amazing, where everybody cares so much. And I think that is very unique in the theater world. Not in the It's very unique in the world. It's
mhm,
not necessarily unique in theater, and I think that's why I love theater as much as I do.
mm. And I will say, I've worked I've been here a bit, and so I've worked on most every show you've worked on, probably,
I think
and
every show you've been there, Peter.
yeah, and so I've seen your work and Kim's work, and I do think that festival is very lucky to have you, Kim, and the other costume designers who have come and worked for us, with how much talent you have, and it brings so much. If everyone was up there wearing the kind of stuff that I wear, no one would want to come and see a show.
I think they would, Peter, especially if there was a character called Peter Weber in the play Peter Weber. You
Who
were
told
dressed
you about
exact,
that project?
you were dressed exactly how I'd costume Peter Weber.
It's a five-man show, but all five roles are played by me.
Are the rest like projections, like 3D projections, or are you
Yeah,
gonna? Okay, cool.
I'll record myself through the ages, and then it's a discussion between all of me yelling at each other.
Oh, sold out show every night. I love it.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
cool. Thanks for your time at this interview, and I guess I don't have anything else for you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for spending the time to talk.